Welcome, everyone, to the Enlight.Life podcast. I am Alexandra Cousins, and I'm joined here by a very, very special guest, someone who is deeply dear to me, David Fastiggi. And David has a long background in health, true healthcare, what I would call true healthcare. And I'll let David introduce himself with his side of accolades, but I want to introduce David as someone who has really helped me to take my own overall healing journey and journey of integration to a whole new level. David also, he's an author of various books. And David, let you introduce yourself, please, because I see you through my eyes, and I kind of like, I always forget, who is David actually?
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you today. I began my healing journey back in 1970 when eating sprouts was considered crazy. But it was a very important turning point for me. In 1970, I read a book on fasting by Professor Arnold Ehret, who I think at that time in history, meaning in the 1800s, was remarkable what he accomplished. I proceeded thereafter into the world of fasting and spent 3.5 years intermittently going into the Sandia Mountains, Jemez and Manzano Mountains of New Mexico. I mean, really deep into the mountains. I'm not talking about foothills, like hiking 7 hours, the type of depth in the mountains where you're lucky if you get back. But courageous we were in those days. And I would fast on river water up to 3.5 weeks at a time, exploring, trying to understand what is the meaning of natural law. When people talk about natural laws, what are they? I wanted to know. And I went to science school for a couple of years and graduated. As you know, I went into medical practice as the chief nutritional consultant for 10 years at the World Medical Health Foundation. But what I realized after several hundred clients is that a great percentage of them were not issues of their body per se. Of course, their diets were not great, but they were suffering emotionally. And herein, I began to realize that there's a very deep, important component of generational trauma, which people were carrying, which was affecting their biology. And this is one of the feed lines into their illness. So I started to work on that area, research, study, and thereafter I wanted to understand some deeper things like spiritual principles, spiritual laws, ancient languages like Aramaic, and what people of millennia ago and more, what did they understand in their own way? And that brought me kind of a full circle. Where then eventually, as you know, I published my book, Deep Healing of the Generations, which is about integration. It's about integrating our emotional and psychological healing with our biological body as a complement. They should not be antagonistic, right? So that's kind of in a nutshell my journey. And of course, we knew of each other through social media, but we finally made the contact.
Yeah, so that's where I kind of want to start these series, because we are going to have what I'm going to call the bonus series of podcasts with David, because I got so much out of my time with David, and continue, of course, to get so much out of my interactions with David. And I always think of David as a one of the rare hidden gems of humanity. Certainly, that is what you are for me, David. And the only way to really get to know David, it's not by looking at your social media posts or anything. You have to read the book, and which is profound. And you have to come and listen to these podcast series so that you can really get the gems, because in my experience, we're in social media, everything is strewn out in quick everything has to be quick and sensational, and if it
Mm.
doesn't shake you in the moment and kind of disrupt your moment with shock effect, then it's not worth posting. Well, David's teachings are deep, and I would say they're only for people who are really ready to go deep, to have deep self-reflection, and to also have a deep sobering experience about what life, and especially life nowadays, really is about. And in the process of being sobered, we are liberated. This was my experience, and we see the possibility of this very moment in history. So I want to start off by saying, the moment that or rather before I then decided to reach out to David, yes, we were, as many, we're social media friends, but I didn't know who David was. I just knew, the only thing I knew about David was that he had a lot of experience in fasting. And because that was such a huge piece of my journey and my journey of regeneration, I eventually reached out to him because I thought, okay, maybe he will understand, because I felt only somebody that had done a lot of fasting and detoxification at a deep level could understand what I was going through. But the space that I was in at the time, this was now more than 3 years ago, and it was really the beginning of one of I hope, the darkest night of my soul. And, as we know, the whole world had kind of fallen apart with whatever we want to call it, right? The pandemic, whatever we want to call it, the crazy thing that happened. And I have to say, on a soul, and me personally, had just moved with my family to what we considered our dream life. We left not because of COVID, but we left because we were ready to leave South Africa to begin my dream life of now getting out there teaching about cellular detoxification and fasting and all the mysterious ways in which the body regenerates at a profound level when given the right circumstances. And because of the depth of my own healing journey, I felt like, okay, wow, I am so ready to now bring this information out in a big way. And as we arrived in Bali and sort of the pandemic hit, I fell into a really deep, dark hole of the dark night of the soul, because I could not believe that humanity, I thought we were a little bit further along. Like, I knew things were bad, but I thought, come on. It felt like there was this movement of, a new dawn is here. And because of my own physical experience with detox, I thought the time is upon us. And the fact that the pandemic happened, it hit me in a really deep way on a soul level. My soul was like, no, I actually don't even want to be here, because if this is where we're still at as a collective, if all of this is happening, I'm done. I really do not want to be here. And so I reached out to David and I messaged him, really, actually, sorry, preface, because before I reached out, in these dark moments where I was like, I no longer want to be on this planet. And I was praying to God for weeks in deep pain, the deepest pain I have ever experienced. And I thought I had experienced a lot. And I said to God, you know what? If all of this is real, if I'm meant to be here, give me a sign now, because I'm done. And as usual, my messages always come as these little soap bubbles that then open in front of me, like, boom, here's a little magic thing for you, and I watched the soap bubble come down and I'm like, okay, what you got now? And it opened and it was like, your face popped up. And I was like, David? And the message was, contact David. And I was like, David? Like, who's David? Yes, I know he's one of my friends on Facebook, but I don't even know what he does. And the message was just like, just contact him. So I was like, okay, whatever, I cried out for help. This is what arrived. And I messaged you, and you kind of immediately messaged back. And we spoke for the first time for 3 hours. And you just spoke to the depths of my soul. And I was like, okay, yes, God is real, God is good. And we began a journey of deepest healing. And so maybe, David, you have a better recollection, because in some ways, I just remember how you really, in that moment, you completely rocked my world and just opened something up at a level that was so deep and obviously so necessary. So maybe you can recall what happened.
Yeah, what happened? As I remember, and I think a lot of people go through this, is we enter into a period of time of hopelessness, because everything that we thought was giving us hope, the things that we thought were solutions, stop working. And when we've tried everything and still the car's stuck in the mud, we wonder, is there any leverage? Is there anything else I can do? Is there any possible solution? When we've exhausted all possibilities, when everything we have tried fails to bring us to where our vision is, and we have a vision inside ourselves, we have a vision in our mind of what life on earth should be. And when we exhaust all possibilities, that's the moment when we know that intervention is necessary. And I think that when we started talking, I kind of opened the curtain and helped to see insight to what is true, what are half-truths, and what is make-believe. So
Yeah.
we start to do a reality check. And this is very important because, as we discussed, the first thing was, well, can we even face reality? Or are we going to continue pretending? So let's first do a reality check and be truthful about ourselves, about culture, about where humanity is, without excluding the vision of possibility. And I think we toggled between the two. Here's reality. No, it's depressing, but here's the possibility. How do we connect reality with possibility? What is the bridge between the two? Because if we don't understand the bridge between the two, either we're pulled into the gravity of despair and everything that we have tried is not bringing the results we hoped, or we live in our projection, our fantasy, which feels nice until you crash, because it's a fantasy, and fantasies only can be sustained so long. Right. So I think our discussions moved along those lines until we found a balance point, as I remember.
Yes, no, you opened my eyes to the fact that we can detox, we can fast, we can do all the spiritual work, but that ultimately, and we can use all these spiritual tools, which are wonderful, but oftentimes still leave unanswered the depth of pain and patterns, because it's not just the pain is one thing, but the fact that the pain of our lineage, the unresolved pain that is sitting, that comes
And
from our lineage, that is inherited, and it lives in our DNA, it lives in our cells, and it then displays itself. So for me, this was the revolutionary, opening, the realizing, okay, I've done all this work, and I've done the work in some ways to try and escape, and as a way of reacting to the pain. And also I saw how occasionally I try to create, innocently try to create an alternative personality, that a personality that could deal with this pain. So, okay, I'm going to be spiritual. I'm going to elevate myself. I'm going to work on, sort of opening up my energy. And yes, that's all wonderful and it works, but at the end of the day, the pain was still there. And there was this, and I couldn't understand why. My question was why. I've worked so hard. I've done so much fasting. I've done so much work internally, and the plant medicines and all the various things. Why am I still in such deep pain? And why can't I just simply live in the higher realms when I have actually physically experienced them? Why can I, in this moment, not be this complete beacon of light when I have experienced the light?
Hmm.
And you brought home to me, you drove home to me the reality that, well, the lineage that you come from, the pain and destruction and distortion, the level of distortion that I came from was still sitting deep inside of my DNA. And even though I had seen the light, those old patterns, which are dense and heavy, they were trying to claw me back. And they were succeeding. They were succeeding. And on the other hand, I felt unanswered by the spiritual community because they were just saying, well, just open up your chakras, just let it go, just,
Right.
and it's like, I've done all those things a million times over.
Yeah.
And the reality is that I needed to be met by someone who could meet me in the depth of my pain from real understanding, not just, oh well, I have empathy for you and I'm going to be empathic, but from a real depth wisdom. And that's really what you did. That's what you did for me. You were able to truly meet me in the depths of my pain and validate it, and actually not try to make it better, not give me tools to take myself out of that pain, but in some ways you made it okay to go, yes, the depth of pain distortion that we all live in to a degree or another is severe, is soul crushing, because once we experience what is possible in our body, in our soul, when we live according to the laws of nature, when we regenerate our body according to the laws of nature, when we experience our true divine beingness, our potential, but we are confronted with the depths of distortion, that clash is so big. And I had to come to terms with the fact that, well, there is no cure in a sense, but rather, yes, the clash is so big, the schism is so big, and you have to come to terms with it. And the only way to come to terms with it is to feel the pain.
So true what you're saying, and it can be very exhausting to feel that
Yeah.
conflict zone. And I think you really,
Mm-hmm.
really shared quite well. Especially what caught me is when you mentioned that we try to create a fabricated personality that can cope with what we know we're not. A
Yeah.
personality that somehow we suppose it's giving us strength because we're living this, I'm a spiritual person, I'm aligning with the universe and other languages that we come up with to make ourselves feel better. But in the private self, the person actually does not feel better. It kind of reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. He's pulling those levers, putting on a big show, as if to project this image of the Wizard of Oz who can do anything. And it turns out that when the curtain was pulled open by the dog Toto, it's just a man who's pulling levers. There's nothing real there, actually. So,
Mm-hmm.
so often, as we have discussed, that people in healing, that I am the light, which I hear, you bring your light to the world. And why can't I always be in that sustainable state? Well, it's because that's not sustainable if it's a projection. If it's synthetic, it's not sustainable. If it's not what you cultivated, it's not sustainable. We can go to retreat, we can have a program, we can feel the moment of fascination and be exhilarated for a moment. Those are moments, you see, for a moment. But those moments do end unless we become people that learn how to cultivate substantially the change of character, change of mind, the changed body. Change does not mean temporary, but sustainable. And if it's sustainable, then we begin to reduce, in my experience, the conflict zone of what we wish and what we are. The vision of ourselves and then the reality of being miserable. So the vision can become a result of a very weak ego sense of self. I have to be something. We see it in social media. Let me use 25 filters to look more than perfect, to the point where I look like AI created me, you know? Let me use
Yeah.
all the whistles and methods to present this idyllic being, angelic being to the world, but in reality, it's not happening. So this is what I refer to as being disassociative. We disassociate from where we are. And unless you're bringing this up, unless we can accept where we are, we can never get to where we should be. Because
Right.
if we don't accept where we are pretending to be somewhere and in denial about where we really are. The beginning is acceptance without judgment, just acceptance, right? This is where I am. This is what I am. But this is not where I intend to stay. So look me up in 3 months and changes will have taken place.
Yes. So, so often I spoke to you about this, the sobering truth. And in some ways, as I'm reflecting, like there's parts that sort of, escape me of this journey because it's been a journey, and in so many ways I'm on the other side. And what it looks like for me to be on the other side, it is this integrated being where my roots my roots have grown in depth, and I am, in many ways, I feel nowadays I live with a constant awareness, integrated awareness of the depth of depravity that I come from. But I'm also at the same time aware of what is possible when we do the internal work, what is possible when we do regenerate our body.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, the two were separate. That before, it was like every now and again, this pain would come and swallow me up.
Mm.
And and then I would disassociate from it,
Mm.
and I would just go into the bliss and into, the
Yeah.
higher realms.
Right. Yeah.
And they would be there for the clashes. Whereas now, both realms are living inside of me. I mean, it seems a little bit dramatic to say in constant awareness, but yes, in a constant integrated dance. So the one is pulling me deeper, and the other one is opening me higher as well. But it's this integration process has happened.
And this is the way it should be, because roots need to be deep in the soil. Otherwise, the person will be uprooted. So the roots are our stability. The roots are our foundation, and these roots are supposed to be cultivated in early childhood. The first 7 years are the grounding. where we come to an understanding of I'm accepted, I'm okay. We have positive affirmations reflected back to us. The feminine in the home, the mother is the comforter. You're okay no matter what. I love you. The father is presenting this more projected sense of strength. I'm your guardian. I will protect you no matter what. So within that, we grow and develop in our soul spirit, and our nervous system reflects how we were loved or how we weren't. It reflects what was absent in our growth period or what was aberrant, meaning wounding and trauma inflection. So that grounding, if we avoid the regrounding, if we avoid the rerouting of our lives, yes, the desire will be there always to space out into the bliss and be in outer space. Quite literally, it's disassociative. And what you're talking about is actually childhood coping mechanism, because the child doesn't have the development psychologically, mentally, to understand, why am I being abused? Why am I being left? It can't be figured out. There's no processing center in the cognitive faculties of the child. So what do? They tune out. It's not happening. Or it must mean something else. Or let me go to my room and become an introvert. Let me shut myself in the dark in the closet. Or let me act out and pull the curtains off the curtain rods in the living room. No, I'm not a bad boy. I'm not a bad girl. What I'm saying to the environment is, will somebody recognize me? What's the first thing an infant does when it comes out of the womb? It cries. In some ways, it's an announcement to the world. Guess what? I'm here. Hello? In other words, respond. I'm here. Oh, I didn't know you were here. You see, when we have a life where we're not recognized, we do not recognize ourselves because there's no mirroring back in childhood development. So as an adult, this carries over. This is why it goes on generationally. It carries through our life, and then the parents start to behave like their childhood, and then their children, you see, grow according to the same fractures in absence of what needs to be there in the growth process. We just have to start with the grounding first. Never mind, everybody wants to get to the goal. Everybody wants to get to the end, but they neglect the beginning.
Yeah.
What's the beginning?
Yeah, and we're constantly working on the development of the self-development, development of spirituality, but the reality is that these fractures from childhood, they are also running our desire for spiritual development, because it's the creation of an alternate being, a being that is now connected.
Understandably, and it's somewhat innate, it's a primal directive. So we have our psychology, which is the way we perceive and understand. We have our spirit, which is deeper than our psychology. Our spirit is a force which is always guiding us to become complete. And then we have our body, which is living it all out, right? So one of our primal directives is stability, shelter, food, to know that I'm safe. This is often missed. So as an adult, we can work towards stability. We can get our food and have shelter, or we can go to the extreme. Let me be a hoarder and collect 70 pairs of shoes, 300 shirts, and never take the garbage out because I can't let go. You see what happens? I need shelter, but that doesn't mean a 27 bedroom, 15 bathroom mansion for two people. What this is a an exaggeration of the vacuum from childhood. But the desire to have, the desire to be complete, the desire to stretch forward, even if it's coming from pain, somewhat organic. We just have to be careful to connect our expansion to answer the brokenness as opposed to expand to cover up the brokenness. Two different
Yeah,
pathways, right?
absolutely.
This is
So
this is really this is healing.
yes, integrating the truth, and it's a, yeah. I mean, I know from my own journey that that's been the hardest thing. Doing the healing work on all other planes was easy, but then really sitting, and in some ways, I would say all the other work, the fasting, the various therapies and workshops and so forth, ultimately prepared me for the moment where the dark soul called me to sit with the depths of my pain. And in many ways, and I had to do it naked. I had to do it without any additional tools. It was just like, okay, now you're ready to really integrate the truth of your life, of the vacuums and the depravity and all of that. So let's maybe jump into, because I of course another big piece of your work that I so love and admire is how you have the ability, which is outlined in your book so beautifully, and your ability to show how our physical issues correlate with the unhealed parts of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go into that. So we have our emotions. We have our emotions. We have our psychology. And we know that within us, there's the energy of our emotions, of our psychology. So we understand very clearly that, for instance, early childhood trauma, whether it's abuse, such as in verbal abuse, abandonment, physical abuse, that if we do not adapt, if the child cannot shake it off, if the child feels it's inescapable. This is how we define trauma, actually, inescapable. So two people can experience the same thing and have different outcomes. Person A will experience post-traumatic stress disorder. Child B will not. What determines whether or not that child could resolve it, modulate it, or they felt trapped and hopeless? So if the person cannot adjust, adults also, when I just talk about child, but if the person cannot adjust, it immediately does what? It accesses the stress axis from the amygdala, which is monitoring fear, the hypothalamus, which is monitoring emotions, pituitary, which is going to respond, and then we have what's called the stress axis. As you know, the adrenals. The adrenals are going to respond. Oh, I'm scared. Oh, I'm under a threat. Oh, I've got to run or I'm going to fight. So what happens here is the body gets flooded with hormones from the adrenal cortex and medulla in order to meet the demand of whatever the fear is. And if we don't adapt at a certain point, we enter into a state of exhaustion. The state of exhaustion means that the body can no longer modulate, recalibrate, and rebalance itself. You can go through adrenal exhaustion, vitamin C exhaustion, perpetuated inflammation because of inflammatory hormones which are produced during the stress reality. This is all normal. What's supposed to happen, however, though, is that these stress hormones are supposed to come back down, which means remodulate. But if the person in their mind thinks that the stress or the child keeps recreating and reliving the stress, then this is like putting the gas pedal to the floor and pulling the emergency brake at the same time. You burn out. So what the studies
Yeah.
show is that there's a greater, and this is shown epidemiologically, so through global studies, there's a greater incidence or probability, usually 30 years later, of autoimmune disease, respiratory disease, and cardiovascular disease. It's because of the perpetual fight and flight syndrome, which goes unabated. And eventually the body totally within itself maladapts to the weak link, whether it's the lungs, whether it's the cardiovascular system, whether it's the immune response, wherever the weak links are, that link could pop because it's been under this constant duress for 20 or 30 years. Can you believe it? All from childhood.
Absolutely. Well, and this is where we know when our hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenals are affected, but actually in particular when the hypothalamus and pituitary, so the upper endocrine glands being the master glands. So this is where, I need to take one step back because when you explain things to me from your perspective, that is where it clicked for me, knowing, because I was aware of the hypothalamus pituitary glands being the master glands, of course, but also the cascading effect on the rest of the body. So having it explained this way and realizing, well, the stressors exactly happened in childhood. The child wasn't able to adapt. That meant that the hypothalamus also already in childhood began dysfunctioning. And the hypothalamus and pituitary gland having a domino effect on the rest of the body, that is where we can then backtrack and go, so the cracks happen all the way back then. And of
Right.
course, initially they are small,
Mm.
but because, and this is what you so clearly describe in your book, because these small cracks happen when you are so little, as you grow up, the cracks get bigger because these cracks never got repaired. And then we see the many cases and growing, dramatically growing increase in autoimmune disease, but also cardiovascular, degenerative diseases in general are rampant nowadays. And yes, we can talk, of course, toxins are involved and the many toxins that we don't need to go into now. But it's not just the toxins. The beginning of the damage happens through the breakdown of the integrity of the hypothalamus pituitary gland and the cascading effects on the rest of the body.
Exactly. And it is cascading. And somehow, and even though like the awareness of diet and vegetarian and veganism and detoxification and all the different modalities and the widespread promotion and usage, and it's all good, of health food stores and organic gardening and so forth. But you know what? Statistically, we are no better than 25, 30 years ago. We aren't. Why? Well, I think there are two
Yeah.
reasons. One is because the pharmaceutical conglomerates, pesticides, herbicides, a lot of things we don't know that are in our foods, genetic engineering, which
Mm-hmm.
now is in many breads, actually. If you read the labels, it says bioengineered. What? It's just bread. I mean, can't you just leave that alone? You know? Let the bread be bread, leave the vegetable, let celery be celery, let a peach be a peach. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's affecting us. But then also there's the unchecked stress. Not just stress, Alexandra, in terms of like at home, at work, or we encounter with individuals, right? That's going to happen. But just like we have a global ecological system, right? We have the atmosphere, we have the movement of the tides, we have the movement of the moon, we have all these balancing systems, where there's the bees and pollen and all these very fragile systems that work together to create a collective environment called Earth sustainability. We also have a spiritual emotional ecosystem, which is created in relationships and community in nations and globally. And my experience is this system, just like our relationship, you and I, we're a system. You bring your friends in, that expands the system. And when individuals are in conflict, unresolved trauma, severely imbalanced, what it does is it offsets our spiritual, emotional, community, collective, emotional, spiritual ecology, which means we are walking through the field of imbalance, the field of depression, the field of people's hopelessness, the field of people's uncertainty, the field of people's fear. Every time you go to the store, you're in this global or town ecological system of emotions, which ideally should be supportive, should be encouraging. Every time we interact with another human being, we should be progressing in our spiritual, emotional, and biological life, as opposed to meeting people becomes what? Challenging. I have to recover because I was just there with humans. Recover, that's like saying I just swam in a polluted lake, or something like that. This is the
Yeah.
problem, is that when we become so isolated and we don't realize that the individual becomes part of the we, and the we becomes the part of our greater collective. If we don't expand personal harmony and accomplishment to the collective, there will be no support community. This is the link that's very important from my perspective in terms of the community surviving toward a better world, is that we can't live in isolation. Forget the mountaintop. Forget living in utopia without addressing hell, because hell will catch up to utopia eventually. And unless we come down out of the mountain and we work with the grounding, we work with reestablishing the roots in terms of helping people.
So from here, let's segue into, just also to give people an overview really with this first podcast, how in the book you explain, because this also is such a profound teaching. In the book you explain that the process of healing and of detoxification and regeneration of the body goes hand in hand with the emotional and spiritual development. So with the deep inner maturation and the growing of roots.
Exactly. So thank you for bringing that up. And thank you for having my book. I really appreciate that. Took me 7 years to write. Can you believe it? So if you picture a ladder, right? You have the vertical part of the ladder and you have these crossbars. So the way we're supposed to develop as a human being, to be integrated without conflict, to be integrated is that one pole is our psychological, emotional, spiritual levels of growth, of which there are basically 7 substantial levels. Here is your biological body. There are 7 levels of detox and regeneration, starting from conception. So the first 3 levels, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, should communicate across that first rung to the development of the brain, neurology, the glands, the immune system. They're supposed to match the first 3 to 4 years of life. So, as an example, on the psychological level, if the child is traumatized or abandoned at 2 years of age, that is going to directly signal the nervous system and the fragile development of the immunological system. So what that means is where the immune system is supposed to be and where the psychology is supposed to be at 3 years of age, they do not connect. They are fractured. And in between this is the potential of havoc later in life. So you go to a 7-year-old. Now we should be at the third level, emotionally and psychologically and spiritually. This is where we, around 7 years of age, start, or between about 5 years of age, we start to identify. I identify as me, as opposed to a 2-year-old is still exploring things and they identify themselves with the thing they're exploring. Okay, but we start to differentiate and separate. We start to identify as I am a being. I am a person. I am feminine. I am masculine. I am boy or girl. However, if the body at that level, now on the other pole, is toxic from hormone runoff in the waterways, nervous system irritants and stimulants, bad bacteria and poor ecology of the bowels, that is going to affect that child's perception of its awakening awareness of self. It's going to. We know this as a fact. So what happens is these 7 levels of the biology and these 7 levels of the psychology, the rungs are not connecting. I'm growing psychologically, but the body's toxic. Therefore, there's an incompletion. I'm detoxing, but my wounds are not being healed, right? Oh, but I just finished a 7-day, grape juice fast, and I've been vegan for 7 years, and I feel like hell. Why? It's because your childhood was hell, and hell still lives in you, repressed in the unconscious mind. But I've done all this detoxification, which means that the person is still a 3-year-old in a 29-year-old body, which means there's no sequencing. What we have to do is go back and resequence, which means if you're going to heal your emotions, heal your psychology, if you're going to resolve your trauma, you mismatch it with detoxification. If you're going to do a 6-month program of regeneration, and you get to say, let's theoretically, let's say on a ruler to the 8th centimeter, in terms of detoxification, if you don't do the parallel matching psychological and spiritually, that spiritual trauma and pain and hurt and resentment is going to absolutely drag you down by oxidative reality. The stress is going to generate a whole series of oxidative realities, which is going to damage the cells, irritate the nervous system, and compromise the detoxification that was done by as much as 30%. That's why we're not making the progress we should, because we are not integrated. We're not matching sequentially the different levels. And what I'm talking about is supposed to be all normal in childhood and in adult life. We're not supposed to grow from conception with the body toxic and the emotions growing, or the emotions broken and the body being fed organic, pure foods. It's contradictory. So we have to start to match every level of life with what we're supposed to have at that level of life. Because anything you didn't have will result in anxiety as an adult. It will.
And this is why when people go on a healing journey or a detoxification journey, or for that matter, detox and regeneration, which should always be combined, and then they hit upon the certain level where all of a sudden detox doesn't feel good, or they can no longer progress, they are regressing, and then they fall into the false idea that, oh, maybe the detox diet is no longer working for me. Maybe the plant-based diet is no longer working for me. I actually now need animal products, right?
Mm,
And then of
mm.
course they go and eat the animal products and they feel better. But the better is because of the stimulatory effect on said adrenal or said endocrine system, which was weakened, which whose weaknesses are being now pulled up and displayed and felt so that we can work them out. So this is where
Right.
then the confusion happens. We
Exactly.
misidentify what's happening in the body.
Exactly. Oh, we could talk for hours on that. So the observation is correct, but the conclusion is wrong.
Right,
I feel weak,
right,
so I
yes.
need meat. Okay. I feel sick, therefore, yeah, you do feel sick. The observation is correct. You are sick,
Mm-hmm,
but your conclusion might be wrong. It's the food
mm-hmm.
making me sick. No, maybe it's your emotions making you sick and not the food.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't eat fruit because, you know, I can't digest fruit. So fruit maybe is not as ideal as we thought it was. No, that's not the answer. The answer
Mm-hmm.
is that your body is not ready for fruit. You need the
Yeah.
root. You and I have discussed this before you get the fruit. There's no fruit on the
Yeah.
tree until you get the roots in. It's basic gardening 101, which can be applied to healing. You have to get the grounding and the root system of life in.
Yeah, I mean, it always strikes me so deeply because also in my own experience with clients where I see when we need the more grounding and dense foods that we need, the more we know that there is an endocrine insufficiency. And of course, it's not just an endocrine insufficiency because that's where, again, what happens in the physical body mirrors what's been happening in our emotional body. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
deeper we can hold, the deeper our capacity to hold our emotions, all of them, to hold our pain, to hold the reality of pain in this world, and to be okay with that, right? Because it is about that. It's about being okay with the way reality really is. So, meaning, because of course we can't blame our parents or whoever, right? Whoever the perpetrator was. It's not about blaming, but it is about understanding where their where their actions came from. Their actions came from unresolved trauma, right?
Right.
Hurt people, etc. And it's this kind of this being able to hold this level of sobering truth in our physical body and in our consciousness. And the deeper our ability of sitting with this, of being with this, the more our endocrine system actually begins to regenerate because there is no more schism, right? There's just this acceptance of, well, this is the reality that we are currently living in that and that has been created. And we can also then understand that, and what do we need to do in order to change it, to change this reality? And when this level of integration happens, together with the physical removal of toxins and of bodily stagnations, together with the supportive help for the endocrine system to regenerate, now not only the physical body is regenerating, but our psycho-emotional, psycho-spiritual body is regenerating, and we become, as a consequence, whole integrated beings with
I think,
roots,
right.
with branches.
Oh, yeah, you bring up a really good point there in the beginning about acceptance because, self-hate is a very powerful degenerative force. Self-rejection a self-annihilation. I am worthless. I am less than life. I don't deserve. And these type of emotions can be very paralyzing and enervating to all the systems of the body. But it doesn't mean that, and we're not saying that it's okay where we are. In other words, this is what it is, and I'm going to live out this miserable life and pretend I'm happy. That's not what we're talking about in terms of acceptance. It's accepting that this is where I am, and I'm not going to be judgmental and self-condemning about myself. So this sense of self-acceptance is really the practice of self-forgiveness, self-compassion. And only from that then can we start to relax and find the strength to heal. Not through self-condemnation, self-contempt, I know the word annihilation is very strong, but people do actually feel that. And they annihilate themselves through high risk-taking, destructive practices, addictive behaviors, whether it's addiction to this, that, or the other. These are semi-conscious and unconscious acts of the driving force of self-contempt. And to begin healing, I feel that the power of acceptance of myself, not to say that how I am is okay, that I'm not going to grow. That's not what I'm saying. But to say that I forgive myself, I accept myself, I still have my innate value, and now from this point of rest, of peace, of dialing down this anxiety of my mind attacking myself, this state of peace, I shall begin the healing now that I'm at rest.
Yeah. Now that I understand,
Yes.
because to me it's a process of understanding, and so to close it off, because of course we're talking about ultimately how do we heal physically, how do we regenerate ourselves physically, how do we come back from physical ailments. And I always note probably 98% of my clients, they all have a history of deep trauma. And we inevitably, at some point, not always initially, because sometimes the depth of trauma only surface as sort of, the months go by, and sometimes deep trauma is even only remembered at a later stage as we begin to work on the physical body and the nervous system, etc. But it always strikes me that yes, 98% of my clients come from a deep history of trauma, and then they at some point get stuck in dis-ease where nothing seems to work. And then the only thing that does work is to combine the physical detox and regeneration with with addressing the emotional component. And what also always strikes me is that oftentimes it's not so much about fixing our emotions or, coming with a toolbox of ways to fixing it, to improving it. But I find in my experience, the biggest improvement is when we understand what happened to us, why we were wronged, where does the trauma come from, why did the trauma impact us so deeply. And when that understanding is there, it's almost like then the body relaxes and the regeneration process can occur, because we are setting things right. We are setting things right for real.
Yeah, it's really a good point. I think most people take the approach of the toolbox. Let me get out the wrench. Maybe I need a screwdriver. Maybe that's going to fix me. Maybe I need a hammer. That's going to fix me. Or Band-Aid therapy. It's not about that. And so I think your point is really very well taken. It's almost kind of like, oh, now I understand. And what a relief that is when we have understanding.
Yeah.
Because with the understanding, we can start to feel hope. We can start to navigate. It's the unknowing. Like, remember we were discussing earlier about the child who is being wounded, but they don't understand. They don't know why it's happening. So they escape.
Hmm.
And it's the
Yeah.
unknowing that actually, it's the feeling of paralysis, of no solution, that actually cultivates post-traumatic stress disorder. That keeps the fuel
Yes.
line open. So as an adult, like you're saying, when we discover the link, oh, I feel this way because of this and that 25, 30 years ago. Not that we have to look so deeply into the past that we can't get out. I'm not saying that, but
Yeah.
we do have the awareness, so it's not such a confusing mystery. And then, in my experience, and this is true of my own life too. When I look back and examine my childhood and A, B, and C happened, I understood how that was affecting me as an adult. And then the
Mm.
mystery was solved, and I could breathe a little bit better because now I understand, as opposed to what's going on. I don't know why I feel the way I feel, and that's exhausting too. I suppose now I
Yeah.
got it. Now I understand. I feel better already.
Yeah. Yes. And that's what I remember at the time. When we spoke, I would say to you, there's this sobering truth. Like you exposed sobering truths to me, and my body just kind of went, okay, this is the sobering truth. And initially it is sobering, so the sobering is not so pleasant, but at the same time there's a pleasantness in it because you know that it just is, this is how it is. And then the healing begins, I would say, almost automatically, but it takes time. It's
Yeah.
it's like a wound. Yeah, sure, we can put all kinds of things on it and whatever, but or oftentimes I think of like a flu. um in my experience, a flu, when I get a flu, which is a detox symptom, I just kind of I go to bed and I don't really do a lot for a flu. I just let it run its course because I know that I'm going to come out of it. My body knows what to do. And I know that even if I take a whole bunch of things, it's still going to take 7 days. So
Still.
why
Right.
not? Right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what it is. And so in conclusion, and we'll have further episodes where we're going to go even deeper into the subjects, into the various subjects. But in my experience, when I encountered, your teachings and we started working together, what happened for me was this realization that a lot, and I'm not saying all, but a lot of the New Age movement and the teachings of the New Age are literally just another cage. So the New Age becomes another new cage to lock yourself up in, believing
Yeah.
that the work is being done, when in reality, we're still sitting at the
Mm.
root of our being, we're still sitting with the same unanswered questions of a child. Because that's where we need to go back and
Right.
remember what happened didn't happen to the adult. What happened to the child that
Right.
is still sitting frozen within us. And then we go and abandon that child. Maybe every now and again we go and visit, right, and do some inner child work, but we do the inner child work, and then we kind of, because I know I did that. I would go and do inner child work, and then it was like, okay, well, enough already, kind of like, go back into your corner. We did a bit of work. I need to now go back to over here. And that just created further schisms.
Yeah. The visitations don't work. It's like the child is saying, Are you going to come be with me? Well, yeah, I will put it on the calendar and, we'll visit
For a
for three
little
weeks
bit.
for a little bit because I'm so busy with my adult life. And the child is saying, thanks. That's exactly what the problem was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You didn't have time.
Yeah.
You didn't pay attention. And now I'm calling to you. Come back and speak with me.
Yeah.
Come back, listen to me, and understand me so that you might find yourself. That's what the child is saying.
And grow me, because ultimately the child does want to
Grow up. Yeah.
grow up and become, but it can't do that if we just exactly visit every now and again and sort of sing beautiful songs and light some incense and do a special ritual,
Hmm.
but then we still abandon the child
Yeah.
because we need to go back to our
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, I know for myself that was a big wake up call.
The reason I'm smiling when you said end the ritual, rituals are fine, but rituals end, and the
Yeah.
child is still left wanting. So, in the end of it all, the beginning is cultivate love, because that is the deepest part of our being. Every child, every human being has the same question: am I loved?
Mm. And
What do you think? Yeah.
if I'm not loved, there is such a burning question of why not? Like, how
Yeah.
could I possibly? It doesn't, to a child, it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
How could it be that I was not loved?
It's
Um,
like you brought up
and
before
so,
about the cascading effects biologically. I don't mean to interrupt, but just before I lose the thought, yeah, the question is if I am not loved, what are the cascading psychological ramifications of that? Where does the mind go with itself?
mhm, it begins, that's where the substitutions begin and the alternate personalities begin, which are
Yes.
developed out of the depths of pain, and it's actually beyond pain. It's a complete inability to comprehend, because
Yeah.
ultimately as children, right, and we know this, we've all seen when children, especially the smaller they are, the more they will just delight when they want to show you something that they did, because they know that they are a gift from the world. And when they are not received as that, there is a complete misunderstand. There's a schism that happens. So, ultimately that's what then creates the ripple effects in the body, and we see dis-ease. And of course, dis-ease is not just in physical form, but it's also dis-ease in terms of mental, emotional, psychospiritual development or ability to be present with reality.
You really brought up such important points. Maybe we'll reserve them for next time. Like the New Age movement, where does it come from? Is it really new? Historically, how did we get here with this construct?
Mm-hmm.
Another important point that's very powerful that you brought up is, yeah, the child can't cope with, I'm not beautiful, I'm not loved. That's something we should look at more and discuss more,
Mm.
the
Yeah,
ramifications of that.
absolutely. So yeah, those are the points that we'll bring up in our next episode. And yeah, I really feel the takeaway, what I would like our listeners to take away, is the understanding that the body only displays the fractures of childhood. So a body that is in dis-ease, and then sure, we can go and accumulate a long list of diagnoses and terminologies and whatever, and that is what most people do. I have this and this condition, but ultimately, those conditions, where do they come from? because we do need to understand why is it that some people have all of these diseases and acquire all of these weaknesses and others don't. What is the difference? The difference is in their ability to digest the reality of their childhood. Because like you said, two people can come from the same background, from the same family, and they will have digested and adapted to their reality in a different way. And so therefore the one will be diseased. And I've seen twins. I've actually myself witnessed twins in exactly that situation. And I've seen how the one is severely diseased and the other one has developed a powerful alternative coping mechanism and as an alternative personality. So, there's a lot to say about all of that. There's, we can fill several episodes, but yes, the takeaway for the listeners is to really understand whatever you're dealing with in your body today has everything to do with what happened in early childhood that was unresolved, and that it does not mean you can't resolve it, number one. And it also doesn't mean that the only resolution lies in doing the emotional, psychospiritual work. You still also have to do the work of cellular detoxification and cellular regeneration. When the two come together, that is when, you're really doing what needs to be done to fully resolve your conditions. So I thank you, David, and I can't recommend David's book highly enough. Where can we find the book? And just mention the title again.
Thank you. It's the
Healing of the
title is
Generations.
Deep Healing of the Generations, and it's available on Amazon.
Yeah. So get that book if you want to really understand the root of your diseases and if you want to understand how to resolve them. Thank you so much, David. We are going to be speaking here again very soon. Thank you, everyone.